But this morning, a lot of results trickling in. 3M posting stronger than expected results on the back of boosted PPE orders. The company revealing earnings of $2.38 a share. That was up from $1.66 a share in the year earlier period. Also, shares rising. Sales, I should say, rising to surpass $8.5 billion. That was up more than 5%. Should also note here, Yahoo Finance's parent company, Verizon, surpassing estimates for the latest quarter. The stock off a bit, though, even after delivering upbeat guidance for the year. Analysts perhaps latching on to a drop in postpaid customers, a net gain of just 279,000 postpaid phone connections compared to a gain of almost 800,000 in the same quarter a year ago. But Aikiko, again, kind of the same trend we've seen so far. Companies topping admittedly low expectations on the street, but not necessarily seeing a reward for doing so.
Yeah, not necessarily in the case of Verizon, largely because of what you just highlighted, which is the drop in subscriber numbers or not coming in as expected. Not necessarily a drop in the quarter. 279,000 subscribers added as opposed to the 561,000 that was expected. But I think, beyond that, we're looking at the outlook. We're seeing those specific companies you highlighted, 3M and Verizon, their outlook coming in above those estimates. 3M, to me, particularly an interesting one because this is a stock we watch very closely throughout the pandemic. Of course, in the early days, it was just about how quickly they can turn around the PPE. But when you look at their healthcare unit, which is, of course, the unit that manufactures the N95 masks, the hand sanitizers, the respirators, everything that has been critical to fighting this pandemic, we've seen 12% growth in sales in 2020, and the company now overall forecasting EPS between $9.20 and $9.70 in 2021. Slightly below estimates on that front. But, overall, it's interesting to see those stock moves. And of course, we're looking at things broadly here, Zach, and just 13% of S&P 5 companies that have reported so far. We were talking yesterday about the beats, but to your point, the expectation was quite low coming into the quarter.
Yeah, and as we talked about yesterday, Bank of America kind of highlighting that they're not necessarily seeing what you would expect in terms of reward share pops after delivering on above expectations. But the other thing that struck me in 3M, we haven't necessarily talked or seen a lot of companies starting to talk about share buybacks. That was the case from 3M. Planning to restart its share buyback program this year. Maybe you wouldn't expect it to see from the financial companies we've been talking about. The banks don't necessarily want to press that right now. 3M, you could make the case, though, appearances wise, might not necessarily look great when we think about PPE and capacity issues there, getting masks into certain spots. But I wonder if that might be something that you would expect to see talked about a bit more here in companies starting to dip a toe when it comes to share buybacks as earnings season rolls on.
Yeah, it's an interesting point from an optics standpoint to what you were saying about what that would look like for 3M. But the expectation, remember, with some of the guests that we've had on, has been that share buybacks will make a big return in 2021. Last week, we were talking about Netflix and potentially them buying back shares. And when you're talking about a company like Netflix doing that, certainly that points to sort of a broader spectrum of companies that are considering that. It's going to be interesting. We're going to be talking about this a little later in the show, Zach. But to me, it's going to be interesting to see how those numbers come in after the bell, whether it is Microsoft or AMD, largely because these have been the momentum plays over the last 6 months, almost a year, the huge growth stocks that we have seen throughout the pandemic. And the big question there, as it has been with previous quarters, is really going to be how much of that momentum is actually going to be sustained. So that'll be an interesting one to look ahead to.